management in the context of project management. So if you're expecting something different, you might be in the wrong place. And if you are in the right place, very pleased to see you all. I'm just going to share my screen because I have got a presentation. I think you can all see that. And can I just check if you can all hear me okay? I'm just going to give you a few seconds if you need to make any adjustments or get comfortable just before we start. Oh, I've got a hand up. Is that somebody?
Not sure.
Oh, okay. Lindsay's going to have a look at all the chat and moderate that for me. Right, so just moving on. This is the second in the PRISM project management series. The first, Josie covered all about foundations of project management, time, cost, scope, things like that. There is going to be a recording come out of that session. I'm going to cover stakeholder mapping and communication. And then there is a third session in July with Benjamin, which is looking at risk and change. So what we'll cover today, I'm going to, around stakeholders, I'm going to do a bit about stakeholder mapping, how to make a stakeholder matrix, and then how you plan your engagement with stakeholders. And then we'll also cover communications plan and key messages. But the first thing I wanted to cover really is why did I volunteer today, and a bit about me. Well, it's because I love talking about project management. My background before I came into university project management was actually project manager for housing for local and regional government. And I've put up 3 of the examples of some of the projects I was involved in here. The first one, which is the houses with the railings, that was actually a Great Yarmouth regeneration project, and I was the project manager for the funder. There was a great housing office, local housing officer, who came up with the idea of there was real. I suppose this is what the area looked like before. I was trying to work out how to describe it, but this is what it looked like before. And what he thought was a real issue was if you can see the walls in World War II, there'd been iron railings like the previous picture here. And they were all given up for the war effort for iron, if you can believe. And 60 years later, they'd never been replaced. And he just had the vision that if we put the railings back, the whole area is going to look nicer. And that's going to address some of the problems. There was problems with absentee landlords, lots of HMOs, things like that. And he really had the vision. And as I say, he project managed the delivery, and I was on the funder side. And you can see the difference that those railings made, and it turned the whole area around where there was influx of owner-occupiers. It just made such a difference. The picture at the bottom is a sheltered housing scheme in Colchester, and I was the project manager for the overall strategy for the sheltered housing for 10 years. And this was a sheltered housing scheme that was refurbished and had lots of eco and energy saving efficiencies put in, for example, light tunnels into hallways of the individual flats. Everything was brought up to a really high standard. And then Gateway to Home Choice was a new system to allocate social housing. It's quite common now what we call choice-based lettings. People could say which properties they were interested in rather than just being offered one when they came to the top of the list. So quite a varied project management background. So that's a bit about me. And I just wondered about a bit about you. So I think because there's so many of us, I thought it might just be interesting to just get a thumbs up. A thumbs up is if you agree to these questions. So I wondered, how many people have project management in their job description? I think now I have to work out. So getting quite a few. That's brilliant. And how many of you have had any formal project management training? That looks to be slightly fewer, which is oh, okay, yeah. And okay, and I suppose the clincher, do you enjoy project management? I think it's excellent. I feel like I found my people. I'm really pleased to meet you all, even if it's virtually. And finally, if there's any particular areas for today, please type in the chat. Lindsay's going to have a look at what you come up with. And either hopefully have some time to sum up at the end if we haven't covered things, or else maybe it could be a future session. So put things in the chat. So I thought I'd start off with this. Why do 70% of change projects fail? The 70% is a bit of a contentious number. I actually undertook an MBA recently, and my dissertation was on why do projects fail, particularly in the local context of where I work. I think there's many reasons, but one that really crops up in people's experience, how to get buy-in to your strategy, which is really around stakeholder engagement and communications. That seems to be one that really people mention again and again for why projects haven't been successful. So this really takes us on to stakeholder mapping. And why I had these three projects was because we'd spent a lot of time in the beginning establishing who actually were the stakeholders, who were really important to talk to. And in the Great Yarmouth project around the iron railings, obviously main stakeholders there were the council. As I said, there were lots of absentee landlords, so they were really difficult to communicate with, and homeowners. But a really important group actually were the wider local residents, because the question that they had was why are people, their perceptions were, why are people getting things for free? Why are you replacing these railings? The landlord should do it. So we had a lot of work about what we thought the benefits would be for the area, why we were doing it, actually that everybody would benefit from, really tackling this, really deprived area in Great Yarmouth. The older people's housing, obviously we were looking at slightly different stakeholders there because we had residents and it was a very small community, but then that gave us different channels, different ways to communicate. And then Gateway to Home Choice, our social housing project and service, that really was that we thought actually nearly everybody was a stakeholder. Anybody could find themselves needing to trying to access social housing at any point. So it was, how do we make people understand, and how can we send them our messages when actually they might not think it's relevant to them? So a lot of it was trying to get people interested so that we had that baseline knowledge. So one of the tools, I don't know if people have heard about this before or seen it before or used it before, is really around a stakeholder matrix. Maybe I'll do the thumbs again. Has anybody used one of these before? Okay, so we've got a few. Brilliant. It is a very well-known tool. And for those of you who haven't used it before, you're trying to map influence or impact of stakeholders and against how interested they are. And really it's their influence or their impact on your project itself. What is their impact on you achieving or not achieving your goals, versus also their interest. of how interested are they in your project. So I was going to do a very simple idea in case this is new to people of setting up a local shop. So this is a really easy exercise, setting up a new local shop. Again, influence versus interest. And I'm thinking, who actually is one of my most important stakeholders? And you might say, actually, local people and customers. So I'm going to put them here. I think they're very influential because if they don't come to the shop, my project is not going to work. And hopefully they're interested because it is in their local neighbourhood. The next one I'm thinking of that's really important is probably the local council because they have a licensing responsibility. And I'm going to put the council here. They're very, very influential on the outcomes of my project, but I think they're probably not interested. They probably actually don't even know that I've got plans to do a shop. The third one I had was the local pub. I thought they're probably very interested because they probably think there's some customers for them if people come to my shop. But actually, they're not. I didn't think they were particularly very influential on whether my objectives would be achieved. And then the last one I thought of, and I'm not sure why that blob's so big, was the local GP. They're actually probably not very influential to my shop, and they're probably not very interested. But I do think actually I need to be aware of what they're thinking about the project. So I was going to give you a couple of minutes, if this is new to you, just to do your own version. It's with paper and pen, if you like. And I've just put some ideas there of what they could be, just in case you're thinking, oh, I didn't think I'd have to be very creative in my lunch break. So if I can ask you just to do your own version for one of these projects, and I'm going to give you just 4 minutes to do that on a piece of paper and a pen, and then we shall come back at 1:19. And if you finish early, you can obviously put questions in the chat for later. Oh, is that a question from someone? Maybe not. Yeah, so I think one more minute. Oh, is this Cherry? Really, that's a good question, really. A stakeholder is anybody who is, I suppose, could be impacted on your project. So that's why you might have people who don't really have much influence or aren't interested. But it's useful to capture anybody you think might be impacted, just so that you can think about them really at the beginning of the project. Policy government. Yes, yeah, I would say, like I say, I would capture everybody. Yeah, somebody who could block it. So you could have the government in, because I'll come on to why in a minute, actually. Brilliant. So hopefully you've got some ideas which will help jog your memory about what you've been doing today. So just going on to next steps, obviously this is my shop one, but what we tend to do is put them into quadrants to make a matrix, and then it's established that this is what you would do for each of those matrices. So for example, where somebody's low interest, low influence, you would monitor them really. So you want to see that they're not changing their position. So this is where you might want to move. So your policy leader in government who's not really influential on your project and isn't really interested at the moment, you might actually want to try and see if you can move them in the matrix. So you might think, actually, I really want them interested. I might not want them to have more influence, but I might really want them to be interested and almost be a bit of an advocate for us. So you can move them around, and like you say, somebody who could block it. Yes, or somebody who could champion it. Keep informed. Obviously, like local pub, you let them know what's going on, but they're not very influential. So the idea of the matrix is that you can decide where you're going to focus all your time and energy. And obviously, that's your top quadrant of highly influential, highly interested. So just for this simple example, it's local customers. And I'll come on to what this could actually look like. This is, I'm based for the UK Data Service, and this is one of our stakeholder matrices that I did recently. And you can see there's a real mixture here of groups of people, and also we've even got, not in this version, but some with named individuals who are highly influential and highly impactful. And it's never comprehensive. People always say, oh, you've missed someone out, but that's because it's a tool rather than a landscape diagnosis in itself. Yeah. And just some tips if you haven't done this before, is it makes a great workshop activity, especially if you've got boards to manage, anything like that, because everybody can influence. And it really is wisdom of crowds. When you do it on your own, it's funny, even with just my example of the local shop, I was thinking, does the pub go there or could it go higher? And you have loads of questions. And obviously, if you're doing it in a group, it makes it really useful. You need to update it regularly. People move around, things happen in the wider landscape. Your, as you say, your blocker, hopefully you might move them to a champion, so you need to update it regularly. And just a handy tip, the easiest way to present it is in Excel, and I've put a link there to a YouTube tutorial, not one that I've done, how to create it, because I had real difficulties actually trying to actually format it. So I thought it's a handy tip. So now you've got your matrix. What what is your next step? And really, it's to. Oh yeah, I'll try and copy that into the chat. You really need to, next thing that you do is that you will make a plan for each segment and what you're going to do. So the first thing would be really, what are your ideas of activity you're going to do with each segment? Obviously, these are going to depend on how much resource you've got, and the type of project. But for example, just going back to the local shop idea, your low influence, low interest people, and who you're going to monitor, that might just be things like reading social media, keeping an eye on local news. Then you have your keep satisfied segment, which are people who are high influence, but they're low interest. And that might be, in the case of the council, giving information to representatives. And really what you're trying to do there is just ensure they feel they know what's going on. They might not be that invested in it, but if they know what's going on, then that tends to be, like you say, they satisfy them. People who are high interest, so they're very interested, but maybe low influence, um, we would say keep informed. So that might be where you're doing social media, doing some updates, newsletters, things like that. And then, of course, your most impactful segment, which is your high influence, high interest. So in our case, this was local customers, or for UKDS, that's really around funders and things like that. We really look to manage closely. So ideas I've put down there really is meetings, making commitments, oh yeah, we're going to take your ideas on board in the project scope, things like that. And really building a relationship with them. I think the manage closely is where you really need to try and make that a two-way thing, and putting the time into that. So that really is where you're starting to build your stakeholder plan, and I will show what that might look in a very simple project plan further down the line. But it will feed into, and this is I suppose, the next tool really, about how you do a simple communications plan. And a communications plan for your project is really, you're going to try and set out who the audiences are for your project. So it could be usually it's your stakeholders again, what the goals are for the communications and key messages. Also, you're going to identify appropriate channels. I think I mentioned that earlier, where when the refurbishment of the housing for older people, they all lived there actually. So it was a really useful way, channels. You could do a lot of face-to-face meetings, a lot of things like, afternoon tea. We did all things like that so people could feel involved. Whereas something like the Home Choice at Colchester project, we're not going to be able to do that for everybody who might be involved there. So we were looking more at radio, because at the time local radio was listened to quite extensively, things like that. So it's really about matching your channels to your messages and your stakeholders. And I think one thing for us is really important actually is working out key times and key time zones, because you've probably got some stakeholders who aren't in the UK. Identifying roles and responsibilities, and then finally also how you are going to evaluate. I think that's a really good thing to try and get sorted at the beginning of the project. So this is a very simple comms plan for the shop. As you know, we had our 4 audiences that I had come up with. Very simple goal. And the goal really, I thought, everyone in the area knows that the shop is coming. Your goals are probably slightly more sophisticated, but one thing I think is really important in the comms plan is around key messages. What is it that you really want people to understand? What are the things that you are going to try and repeat in all your communications? And for the shop, the key messages really I thought was about the shop is for you, it's your shop, it will be open when you need it, and it's got local owners who live in the area. And that's the sort of thing we would base key messages around. We also have key messages for the data service, and I will show them to you later. And it's just really useful so that when people maybe do presentations um, or especially for media training, things like that, people probably won't repeat them word for word, but just having the general gist of, what is the bedrock of what you want to say about your project. Channels in this case, obviously social media, local newspapers, and I've noted down there, in this case we've got no budget and avoid school holidays. Just all things like that are really useful just to note down in your comms plan. Roles, just make sure it's really clear who's doing what, and also, as I said, how are you going to evaluate this? Especially if you've not got much budget, you're probably not going to be trying to do any, audience sentiment or anything like that. You're just going to have to look at things that you can easily count. And this is how it might look in a very, very simple project plan of actually what would you do in the case of the shop. So, you're doing media monitoring every month, reviewing stakeholders every month just to remind me to do it. It might be we're attending council business group breakfasts every other month, joining local Facebook page. And I always identify which segments I think those activities are really going to target to make sure that I'm putting my my resources and my time more in the correct segments, because I have seen projects where people spend a lot of time talking to people who aren't that invested and aren't that interested, and really are missing some real key players. So I thought I'd just give you 1 minute to note down in case you've suddenly thought, we haven't got key messages in the comms plan, but I think we should have some. I'm just, strike while the iron's hot, I'm just going to give you 1 minute break from me talking to note down if any key messages have sprung to mind. Okay, so hopefully you managed to note something down. I thought I'd show you UK data services, our three main key messages. As you can see, them are, I suppose, more appropriate for our project than for the shop, but it's just something that, so say, everybody feels equipped to know what is it that we want to say about the service. And although it can seem quite obvious to people, actually, if you were to ask 10 different people, what is the most important thing to say, you would probably get different answers. So it just makes it really easy to know that actually we really want to make it quicker and easier for researchers to get the data they need when they need it. And it's just those simple key messages that people can reuse, which really helps. So I've whistled through because we've got quite a short time and I wanted to leave time just in case there was questions of what we've covered. We've covered a quick look at stakeholder mapping and then how you would turn that into a matrix and identified which segments your stakeholders would fit in, and then some ideas of how you're going to engage with those stakeholders. And then that will then feed into your communications plan. And particularly, I wanted to highlight around key messages. I've just put a couple of resources and I'll try and put the links into the chat. The gov.uk has some really useful project management and communications resources. One, they have a very easy sheet on stakeholder mapping and also one on communications plans that are really simple to use. And I just wanted to flag up the next session, which I said is about risk and change, and nice description of defensive driving. And I'll just look at some of the questions. Yeah, so I wanted to, was it Christina mentioned about the people who can block and people who can support. One thing I was going to cover, but I think we would run out of time as well, is force field analysis. I don't know if if anybody has heard of this tool or used it. And really, it's you can almost line your stakeholders up and see if you've got a blocker, have you got someone of equal influence who's a real supporter? And if you you can try and visualize it. And so if you're quite a visual planning type person, which I think project managers tend to be, you can actually see, oh, if I build this person up or infuse this person more, they could probably counteract the negative effects of this person. It could be organization, or it can be things. So that's Lewin's force field analysis. I shall but if you just Google force field analysis, I put it in the chat. It's a really simple tool that, again, you can just sketch out on a piece of paper and pen, but I find it really, really useful. So that's Christina. Effective strategies for collaborating with external funders on stakeholder advocacy and research projects. Yeah, it's oh, Marcella, is it difference in priorities? Is that where maybe people aren't, when you're saying they're not as invested in your project as you would want them to be? Is I mean, part of your stakeholder engagement might be to move them and make them more interested. And of course, normally the most effective way to do that is really around establishing that two-way dialogue. But if I've misunderstood your question, Marcella, please let me know. And as Lindsay said, perfectly, please feel free to email me. Actually, I've got my email or LinkedIn. If you have a complex project, would you do different stakeholder matrices for different areas? It's a difficult one because it's like, well, how complex are they? If they don't if you think they don't overlap at all, then you might want to. If you think actually they do have views on different areas of the project, you might want to keep one. It's really how how can you make it simple? Because what you don't want to be doing is make an industry out of these sort of tools and plans. So I would say try and avoid it because you are going to want to revisit them. But that might be good if you do it in a workshop. That might actually come out, and there might be some interactions that you're not aware of. Yeah, I will share those links to the resources. I'll try and do that now. And Benjamin. So Benjamin is going to be session 3. Tacit yeah. I think actually it, I mean, stakeholders is really loose, isn't it? I think when you, I suppose it's one of those things where you know them when you see them. And I think stakeholders do move, and you're right, with HE, one of the things that for us, we never really considered the public as a stakeholder, I would say, because we don't actually carry out research ourselves. We run a service that researchers access data through. So we didn't really see the public as a stakeholder in themselves. However, ESRC as our funders really are now starting to talk a lot about the public being our stakeholders. So we're now having to consider them a stakeholder and work out where do they fit on the matrix, what are we going to do with them. I think probably that's where the wisdom of the crowds and trying to do it in a workshop would be really useful, because you could get everybody's understanding of what a stakeholder is and just include them. And then you can make sure you've got all bases covered. You might then not actually do anything too resource intensive towards them. I've seen in our, oh yes, bystand, yes. Yes, so there's lots of different ways that you can carve up the matrix, and I think once you start with a simple tool, then you start looking at more, and yeah, and it's really which ones do you like? Like I say, this was a real introduction, a real start, and hopefully that looks really interesting actually about the bystanders, onlookers, affected, and exploiters. Oh, Melanie, that's where I was really thinking about um, the force field analysis. Did that cover what you were saying? You know that that you can look to get balance of forces. Oh, sorry, no, that was Christina's. So maybe I haven't done your question. Sorry. How to get buy-in to your strategy. Melanie, do you mean your strategy overall for the project, or the strategy for a stakeholder engagement and the communications that you're doing? Because I think if it's the latter, hopefully some of those people that you're trying to get buy-in, actually you would include as stakeholders in your matrix to make sure you've got them covered. Is that what you meant? Overall strategy from line manager. Yeah, I think if they're influential to your project, then get them into your matrix, and that might help identify what you need to do with them. Oh yeah, excellent. And Christina's come up with a really good tool there. Actually, that's interesting. Maybe a future session, Lindsay, we could have a sort of tool sharing session. I think that could be really good. Which ones have people found really useful? Because I've tried to narrow it down to 2 because we've only had 45 minutes, and there are so many out there that actually find really useful. I'm going to stop sharing now. So there's my email, and you're all very welcome to email me with any questions. And also that's me on LinkedIn, Jo Webb UK. Please get in touch.